So I'm just going to get started here. Thank you for joining me. I really appreciate you taking me up on my invitation for a discussion. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you've got to say and then what your questions might be. But if you could quickly just tell us a bit about yourself and what you do.
Well, my name is SeyeKuyinu. I'm from Nigeria. I moved here to the States about 5 years ago. I work as an agile coach. My day-to-day job that I help organizations to understand value and software development teams to deliver faster through working as a team as opposed to being individuals. So I in a in a separate part of my life, I used to be a software developer. So one of the things that frustrated me about software development was the constant need to deliver something. And I was always working like 14 hours. A server was always down. Like I didn't have time for like family and things like that. But somehow during my personal journey, I just realized I wanted to do something that was a little bit more in quotes human. And agile seemed like the entire principle of agile seems to vibe with what I thought personally.
Fluidity. Right? The ability to move around and to express yourself as you want to, as opposed to as you need to. I understand that. I used to do web design and online marketing once upon a time. And it pays the bills. It pays the bills, right? Yeah. But then there's the part of me that it just wants to talk about things, wants to be inquisitive, wants to continue to peel back the layers and feel enthusiastic. And that's what drives me very much, is that I love to be enthusiastic to the point where it's almost overbearing. My poor wife, she has to put up with me all the time. So now that I'm on TikTok, she gets a little bit of a break here and there, right? But enthusiasm drives us. Enthusiasm, I always find the etymology of enthusiasm to be interesting, because it means to be possessed by God. And so that really just means to be full of yourself, right? To be complete, to be whole, and to be acting from that sensation. That's why I love watching kids play. They're full of enthusiasm. They're not playing for our approval.
Oh yeah. So like with so I would say I'm a person of many hats. I used to be a UI designer. I used to be a software developer. I used to program. I used to do websites. I used to write software for like applications. I speak about 3 languages. I play the violin. I play the piano. I play the guitar. All of these things. And oftentimes people ask me like, how are you able to do all of those things? And I'm like, it's not so much about like, oftentimes people jump towards, oh, you're so talented, you're a genius. And I'm like, I'm not sure it's that. I think it's number one, curiosity, then understanding that passion is like, it almost feels like a stream. Like if you are passionate about something, the more you drive in that direction, it like other things, you begin to attract, quote unquote, other things, and somehow you become that thing that you are passionate about. And that's what it has been for me.
That's well put. That was really well put. That's exactly it, right? Now, I always find it funny because people talk about manifestation and they try to consciously create something before they're in that flow, before they're actually experiencing the flow and allowing it to come to them as a result. It's like they're sitting in their apartment, not flowing at all, trying to picture, no, this is what I want. It's like, but you have to participate. You actually have to be in there.
Yeah, and I remember something that you said about playing, watching children play, and one of the major tools that I use as an agile coach and other good agilists use is play, because somehow play gets us out of our element and gets us to actually see the concepts, the heavier concepts that we're trying to integrate. It helps us to see it in those little things where your physiology changes, you're able to be like a child. And I realized working with adults in my past job, I worked with a utility company here, and the youngest person that I worked with was probably about maybe 49 years old, and I realized that just introducing play, everybody's still a child, and we really want to play.
We really want to play. We really want to play. That's exactly it. And we live in a world where even at the age where we want to play, when we're children, we almost get put into a position where it's like, well, we know you want to play, but we want you to be somewhere for 8 hours a day, like a job. right? And so by the time we become adults, it's like we forgot how to play, because we always think that play has to have some end result, and that's never what play was, right? Play was its own point.
Yeah.
But it's really bringing people back to that, and I think a big part of it is just getting out of our own way, right? Just stop making it about the end result, stop making it about time, stop trying to get anywhere, and just dig your hands into the dirt and get dirty.
Yeah. On my Instagram stories, for the last maybe 2 weeks, one of the major things I've been saying is like we rush nowhere. I don't know where we have this concept of trying to get somewhere. It's like, where exactly are you trying to get to?
Right.
There's nowhere we're going.
Nope. Doesn't matter where you go. You're still here now.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, life is symbolism. I've always thought that life is more symbolic than physical. And so I remember when I was younger, I was feeling pretty depressed, pretty lost. I had just woken up recently. And so I was looking at the symbolism, but I was still going through my old programmed responses. And I was wandering through this mall in Calgary. And I just kept going through this thought like, oh, I feel confused. I don't know what I want to do with my life. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do with this? What's my purpose, basically? And I'm just wandering aimlessly. And I stopped and I just kind of like looked up at the sky. I'm like, come on, there's got to be something here. And I'm not even kidding. I was stopped right beside the mall map. And on that map, the only answer it showed me was, you are here. And that hit me. I was like, yeah, okay. That's exactly it.
I mean, that kind of brings me to one of the first questions that I wanted to ask you is, what's your journey or your background like? I'm always like, anytime I see your TikToks, I'm always very curious. Like, there has to be a backstory. Like, what's that backstory?
I just lived a really weird and kind of isolated life. I didn't have much of a family growing up, and so I was more or less forced into a position of being isolated and transient. I moved around a lot, or I got moved around a lot, and then when I hit my teenage years, I internalized all that. And I made it about me instead of just the position that I was in as a result of the choices of the people around me. And so I suffered like that for about a decade. I got to the point where I was suicidal, and I was participating. I was doing all the things that society told me to do. I was working well. I was well respected. I was nice to people, blah, blah, blah. But I was miserable. It didn't feel real because it wasn't real. I was wearing the coat that I thought was necessary for whatever situation I was in. And finally, after I tried being the party guy and the business guy and the successful guy and the good friend guy and all that, and it just came down to me realizing that no matter which guy I was being, I was still alone, even in a room full of people around me who said they liked me, because I was never being myself. And so it drove me to the point where I didn't see a point to living anymore at all. And I lived there for a long, long time until one day I realized I had been carrying around a story about how I lived in relation to everybody else and to every other character's life that I'd been exposed to, but that it wasn't my story. I was never looking at it from my own perspective. I was always thinking like, oh, I'd really like to do this, but what would this person think? Or I'd really like to do this, but where will that put me in 5 years on my career path? And at no point did it ever just come down to, I'd really like to do this. And that's all I need. That's all I need, because it's what I want to do right now. And as soon as that hit me, my whole life came into focus. All of a sudden, I realized that was the one thing I had never done. I had never made it about me. Yeah. And so 20 years later, I am still just trying to communicate that insight. I'm trying to, I like to say that I spent so much time in hell that I made a map. So I'm trying to show people that map, how to get out, how to realize that you're in it, and then see through it, because it's not as difficult as our mind likes to make it. Hell, the one thing about hell is the idea that it's all that is, that it's all that will ever be, that you can't get out because there's nowhere to get to. And as soon as you realize that's not the case, it starts to ease off a bit. You start to feel a bit more free. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell, but there's a lot of twists and turns in that.
Yeah, one thing that's very, what I see as common to everybody's story, so to say, is how you hit that what I'll call rock bottom, and somehow that creates the new shift. So like for me, it was more, I lived in Nigeria. I had a startup that didn't do well after some time, and I got hit really bad into a wave of depression. And somehow I saw an advert. I was on the internet and I saw an advert for, it was some meditation thing that cost about $300, and $300 felt like the equivalent to me then, equivalent of $10,000. I didn't mind like purchasing that, but what really struck me was how I'd never meditated, I'd never done all of that. But what struck me was how something so simple was so meaningful, and then that opened the door to other things. Now, in talking with different people, you just hear that same thing, or I was really depressed, or things were not going really well, and then boom, something else, sprouted open.
It's surrender. I think that's what it is, right? It's I beat my head against my own cerebral wall for so long, and it always ended up back in this place where it's like, I'm still suffering, I'm still unhappy. Like no matter what I do, I still end up back at this place. And so finally, you're like, you know what? I just give up. I'm done trying to control my way to happiness. I'm just going to be here and make that what this is about. And it's all of a sudden, it's like everything just gets peeled back, and you go, oh my God, I've been here this whole time. I've literally just been here trying not to be here.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. It's like, and this is why I think it's so funny that religions often talk about humility and faith, because that's what that is. It's all of a sudden you just give up and surrender to where you are.
So I have a question for you. You mentioned something where you said, now I'm paraphrasing, but you said something about at the end of the day, you realize it's about you and what you want to do. I feel like it gets to a point where there's a seeming fine line between that and selfishness, or between that and what's the word? And there's a word I'm looking for. Where you're just all about yourself and you don't see others. I feel like that's a line that a lot of people don't know how to navigate.
I think the difference is identity, honestly, because when I'm trying to satisfy my idea of myself, that's a very different feeling than when I'm just being myself. So as long as I'm trying to accomplish something, I'm trying to feel better, add to my value, think of myself in a different light, or feel more comfortable, then I'm not being myself. I'm trying to feel better about my illusions. I'm trying to maintain that idea. And while that can feel good sometimes, what happens is eventually something comes over and contradicts that idea, or you end up with an idea that is coming from a different perspective that doesn't necessarily fit with the idea you've been holding on to. And so your option is always to let the idea go and question it, look a little deeper, which of course requires you to be humble and be faithful and come back to the moment. Or you can hold on to that idea, and that's when things get distorted. All of a sudden now what you're doing becomes suffering. It becomes distortion because it becomes a need. It's something you need to do. Otherwise you're never going to feel fulfilled. You're never going to be happy. And so that changes everything. So everything that I try to do, or everything that I do from moment to moment, is based on what I want to do in that moment. And it can't be for an end result. I can't be doing it for the sake of being a better person in the future. I can't do it for the sake of being more valuable once it's done. It has to be a reflection of me being whole and complete now.
Yeah. It's, it's always very interesting when what you just explained to right now, and you talking about you being complete here and now is that entire statement, or the concept of that statement itself, is something that 2 years ago would have been very difficult for me to wrap my head around, because it just feels like you're saying something without saying something.
Yep.
And I realized that language in itself is very weak.
Yeah.
So oftentimes I have these things that I want to share, or I even want to write out, and I'm like, I've written it out now, but who is going to understand what I'm saying? So it's like almost the same way you talk about things like how we are all one and how we're all connected. Expressing that to somebody feels crazy.
It's so hard.
And one of the things that I've been able to learn is using metaphors. Yep. So one thing that I use sometimes is, if you pick up a coin there are two sides to the coin. So one side sees this side, and another side sees this side, but it's still the same coin.
It's the same.
So
coin.
imagine if one side of the coin is arguing with the other side about how no, the world, or this is my idea and this is what I see. Right. So that has been using metaphors has been one of the stronger tools that I've been able to use to separate or to unravel that abstract thought. But I'm curious, like, what other tools do you use? Because you communicate all these things a lot, and oftentimes, even with when I hear you on TikTok, oftentimes I have to like replay what you're saying like 10 times before I'm like, oh yeah, that's what it is.
That's fair. I think it's important to remember I'm old. Right. I'm in my 40s. I've been doing this for 20 years. And I mean, consciously just being awake and aware of my programming for 20 years. And so a lot of the times when I'm talking on TikTok, it's not actually me thinking, I'm just talking, it's just coming out, but it's been going through so many times, it's been distilling so many times over so many years that it comes out sounding very, very simple. And then you look at it and you're like, wait a minute, there's other layers to that. there's more to that than what he's saying. And I almost enjoy leaving it on that for that reason, because then you can come back to the same video a year later in a different state of mind and you'll catch something completely different out of it. Right. And I enjoy that. That's why somebody actually asked, why are your videos shorter lately? And it's because I enjoy not necessarily giving a detailed answer, but an answer that points to the insight that will help them find their own answers. And because people have to think for themselves. That was the one thing in life coaching that I found early on does not work. You can't give people answers. You can't just say, well, your problem is this, because then they'll take that, they'll run with it, they'll define themselves with it, and then that becomes another problem.
Yeah, and that's with your point. I mean, I come from a Christian background, and one of the things that I learned, I mean, of late is how, I mean, forget about the politics of religion and how your religion has been a tool of conflict and all of that. One central character from Christianity that I have come to get inspired from is the character of Jesus, and how, however imperfect the Gospels have been written, you begin to realize, first of all, he was never really telling people what to do. He was always throwing these little things. Like oftentimes in these narrations, you hear people come to him and ask a question, and then he just answers with something very abstract. Yeah, and then really at the end of the day, you take what you want from it. And somehow it feels like the religion of Christianity would, for whichever identity politics it wants, they just pick whatever that thing is and then run with it. And however they're going to use that is up to anybody. And
absolutely.
Now there's all the confusion everywhere.
That's it. And that's the thing. Like I grew up Roman Catholic. That was a large part of my childhood. And so Jesus was a major character. And it wasn't until I got older that I realized, hold on a second. I started reading through it. I'm like, he actually never said he was the only child of God, ever. It's not in the book at all. And then when you start reading the parables, you go, and he says, well, let he who has ears to hear. You're like, okay, you're saying something here. You're a clever person, but like it's just like you knew people weren't going to get this. You knew it. You just left these seeds to ripple throughout time, and that's exactly why I TikTok. Right? It's like I don't ever want to be in a position where people go, oh, he has the answers, because I'll be the first one to say no. No, I don't. Right. Yeah. And that's it. And so when Jesus was crucified, or when they're like, oh, they're saying you're the Son of God, he's like, no, I didn't. I didn't. Yeah.
All of those, it makes me realize, I mean, it's so inspiring to me. Like one of the just to put this out there, I no longer identify as Christian. I don't identify as anything, because I don't believe in identifying in anything.
Right.
But there's this verse in John 10:10 where it says, Jesus was quoted as saying, I've come that you may have life and have life abundantly. And then I'm here sitting down like, wait, he's not talking about an afterlife.
Nope.
He's like here and now, life right now. And then like make make of that as you will. It's like,
Absolutely.
you have a lot of life right now, and it's abundant right now.
It's so
and I'm
funny.
like, why don't people talk about this?
Right? Or I think it was Mark 12, where they ask him about, well, what about, the dead rising or the afterlife? And he literally gets upset with them. He's like, you're talking foolishness. God is of the living. Straight up, God is of the living. And it's like, it's like, oh, let's talk about heaven. It's like, what? Are you not paying attention? Right? Or Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of Thomas is by far one of my favorite Jesus stories, because, and of course, it's not in the New Testament, because of course it wouldn't be. But that testament is so good in that it talks about it'd be like sitting around a campfire with the guy. No virgin birth, no healings, nothing like that. We're just sitting around chatting, and I love that gospel for that reason. But you can see why they didn't use it.
Yeah. So I know you in some of your videos, and right now or a few minutes ago, you talked a little bit about why you why you're no longer a life coach. So I'm curious about the background around that also.
So I was life coaching in the last city I lived in before I moved out to Vancouver Island, and I was doing it because I really enjoy helping people where I can. But what I found in life coaching was that you end up being a crutch if you're not very careful. If you're not very, very careful, you can quite easily become the thing that they turn to rather than themselves. And so in life coaching, I would find myself spreading out the sessions more and more as my clients progressed. I would find myself going, okay, you've had a good insight here. I'll see you in 3 weeks instead of 1. And their response would be, well, why? It's like, well, because now you've had the insight. Now you have to apply it. Now you have to go through the shit, as it were, and put it into action. I can't do that for you. And as I started doing that, and my clients started progressing more, I realized that the more involved I was, the less it was helping them. Yeah, I was better off to give them short insights to dig on, short things to pick on themselves, but they had to have the will. And in life coaching, I found that more often than not, people were looking for me to be that will. I would have clients who would come in and they would sit there, and then they do nothing. They would do nothing with their time. And so I would start talking. Oh, yeah. Oh, I know. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know. And then they'd leave and go back to their life as normal. And they could do so convincing themselves that they were making progress because they were seeing a life coach. Right. And that's the same reason that I left my original YouTube channel. I posted a couple of videos back from 2005. I had a YouTube channel back then called The Journal of a Forgetful God. And it was just me working through the stuff that I had been going through when I came out of the forest. And I made, I think, 100 videos within 60 days, and they were all about 10 minutes long. Like I was just talking endlessly. It just wouldn't stop. And what happened was that people started subscribing, but then they started worshiping. They started following. They started, oh, I wonder what he's going to say next. He's got the truth. Listen to him. And every time that's ever happened, I quickly exit stage left. Because it's not what I want. It's not what we need. It's the same thing that Krishnamurti made the point of when he was younger and they tried to make him the leader of the Order of the Star. His first act was to dissolve the order. He's like, you don't need a messiah. You need to be responsible.
Yeah. Oh, that's powerful. Yeah. So one question that I have for you is, I would say I've had a rather interesting journey in what people would call awakening, which I don't even understand what that term really is, but I get where it's coming from. But I remember there's a time I read the book The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, and that's probably a book that just like scattered everything for me, and I started questioning everything. I had a time in my life where I would start to deconstruct even things like my religious beliefs and things that I had patterns and belief systems that I had held on to from like childhood. And of late, probably in the last 4 years, I've been able to realize this thing that I call myself doesn't really exist. And there are those moments of strong sense of awareness, and then there's that it goes away. And recently I heard, I was listening to who was it, Jim Carrey, talk about his experience and boom, then it all went away. And I'm like, yeah, that's me. Yeah. You know, and listening to a lot of what you say, I mean, I can relate to a lot of the things that you say, but sometimes I ask myself, like, do you ever get to that point where even those things that you know for yourself, they flit?
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure. Absolutely. I lose my balance from time to time. I think the only thing that's changed is that I get better at catching it. I can actually feel myself losing my balance now, whereas before it used to be more of a cerebral process where I would go like, oh, I'm thinking about the future, or oh, why am I comparing myself to this person? And so it was me trying to discipline myself to think a different way. Whereas now I can feel myself losing energy. I can feel myself losing my clarity and my presence and my enthusiasm as soon as I start to think about my assumptions of other people. As soon as I start to think about myself and my identities, it all just starts to fall apart. But it becomes a feeling. And I'll admit, like, even just before this chat, I got very frustrated by the fact that I was trying to make everything work so I could have this chat and everything was going wrong. And then it's like, okay, well, I just got to stop thinking about this. Just get into the chat and it's going to work out however it's going to work out, but just get into the chat. And so I find more often than not, me reestablishing my balance is me reminding myself to just shut up and move forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And that's
so
it. But it's like walking a tightrope, right? You start and it's a little off balance. And if you're not paying attention, you lose your balance. But once you get the stride, once you get your balance down and you start relaxing a bit and you get into it, you just walk right across that tightrope. But you can't think your way across. You can't think about, oh, I'm going to make it. I'm going to make it, because that doesn't do anything. That doesn't help you stay balanced. It's like the difference between thinking about the water or feeling the water and swimming.
Yeah. You know, one thing that, once again, like probably 2 years ago, when I hear about like duality or non-duality, I'm just like, those are just words. I don't know what that means. And being able to realize that black and white are actually like, yes, polarity exists, but they are not really places that
they're not opposites.
that exist. Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
And everything in the grays are actually the beauty. I did like a small series on Twitter where I said I called it the glorious dance. It's like a dance. So like when you say something like you're talking a little bit about, you know, the times that you have to catch yourself and all of that, I find that these experiences are by themselves, even though they may seem frustrating, they may seem like an experience, they are actually part of the play, they are part of the dance. And I just realized that for me, every single thing is part of every single thing. And that sounds like, it sounds crazy to articulate, but it's just that.
But that's
everything.
I have had so many people over the years say this one thing. Well, aren't you just saying what's common sense? It's like, yeah, I am. I'm actually saying what's exactly obvious to everybody who wants to pay attention. What the problem is that most of us aren't paying attention, right? And then that's it. It's not like this is why I avoid the metaphysical stuff. This is why I avoid the concepts where it's like we start getting into angels or we start getting into the universe or other beings. I avoid all that because it can become such an easy distraction. It can keep you from the moment.
Those are part of the things I wanted to also discuss, because I noticed, like, obviously with TikTok, the more you follow people who talk about, you know, these relatively metaphysical things, you begin to get all these like suggestions from TikTok around other concepts. And I realized with I don't know so much about things like crystals and all these other things, and I don't doubt their power. Sometimes when I think about them, I just think they are once again another crutch that we want to hold on to. And it's not that crutches are bad, but you can't rely on them. So it's like the analogy I use with someone is sometimes you have this wooden stick that you're supposed to use to pick out something from the shelf because you can't reach. But because you use that and that works now, you now decide, hey, let me use that to walk. And then before you know it, you've even lost the ability to walk
Yep.
because you're using a crutch. And sometimes when I hear and I see some of these things, I'm like, I understand the value and I understand why they may work, but
There's a danger.
crutches. Yeah.
There's a danger. There is. It's an
Yeah.
addiction like anything else, right? And so like crystals, spirit guides, mantras, incense, all that fun stuff. They're all, okay, so I always look at it this way. Imagine somebody who's totally aware, completely enlightened, doesn't have to do anything to be fulfilled and complete. That person would really enjoy lighting a stick of incense. That person would really enjoy playing with a Tibetan singing bowl. That person would really enjoy practicing yoga, but they don't do those things to be enlightened. And that's where we tend to make the mistake. We go, oh, well, that aware person does these things. So if I do those things, I'll be aware. And it's like, not quite, because the awareness has to come first. Then the things become appropriate. It's like the 10 Commandments, right? People are like, if you follow the 10 Commandments, you'll meet God. It's like, well, if you realize you're God, the 10 Commandments just make sense.
I like to see that. Yeah, I love this perspective. It's almost like with I know in spiritual talk they talk about like how you have to like feel and be the thing that you want to attract, and you vibrate on that frequency and those things. And in NLP, I'm an NLP practitioner. One of the things they talk about in goal settings and all of that is, first of all, assuming the thing that you want and you be that thing that you want, and then you're that thing. And obviously, from a physiological perspective, I understand how that works. But it's like you have to realize you are all of these things and anything first before that thing becomes. You definitely gravitate and pull those things. I mean, no wonder they call it attraction, but I mean, I think the word attraction is beating that whole concept over and over.
But it's such an ego pull, right? It's the idea. It's like, if you're spiritual enough, you can get everything you want. And it's like, oh, that's so dirty. That's such a dirty thing to do, right? Where I like to do the opposite, where it's like, if you let go of your ego, you'll have everything you need. And it changes the perspective. But it comes down to that question of who has more, the person who has everything or the person who wants nothing.
Geez, that's a powerful statement.
Right? And so we focus so much on what we want and we don't address the lack that makes us want it. And that's the problem, is that when people are trying to manifest these things that they feel are going to make their life more complete, what they're really manifesting is the state of lack that they're in. So they continue to lack. They continue to not get what they're looking for. Even if they get what they're looking for, they can't enjoy it.
That's powerful.
Right? But it's that relinquishing of control again. And we really have a problem with that. One thing that really helped me was in martial arts, where my sifu reminded me in a fight that we don't have control. At best, we have influence. And that influence is determined by how close to the present we are, by how much we're being ourselves. The more you try to anticipate a fight, the more likely you're going to get hit.
Yeah. Yeah. That's powerful.
But there's no control in it. It's very unsatisfying egotistically to be present, because you can't compare yourself to other people. You can't shoot for the future. You're not trying to escape the past. There's nothing that you need. There's nothing that you should have to want. Everything is just an act of will. It's an act of freedom.
Yeah. So what's your I'm curious about your idea of so sometimes I think about this, how we are whole, we are complete, we've always been. But somehow it feels like there's a sense of we forgot who we have always been. And then that question, what I now start to ask is, how or what made us forget? Like,
that's good.
What exactly happened?
So are you a parent? Do you have any kids?
No, I don't.
Okay, so my daughter's 14, and I used to wonder the same thing. And of course, I can look back at my own childhood, but we have kind of spotty memory of that at best. So watching my own daughter grow up and having to teach her language, having to teach her ideas, having to teach her to separate her reality into concepts, you start to realize, Oh, it's just that we don't rein that back at all. We just go wholeheartedly, yeah, the description is the described. And then we grow up into that and we stop remembering that it never was. We stop remembering that there is something underneath the description that we're trying to describe, and that the description is never that. And so when we start to try and remember who we are, we start to try and remember a concept. We start trying to remember an idea of who we are. But self-knowledge is not conceptual. Self-knowledge is a state of being, right? So when we remember who we are, that's a state. It's not an idea. That remembrance is the feeling of freedom, right? And so when we try to go, oh no, I can remember being a multidimensional being from this galaxy, it's like, no, you just cut yourself off. All you've just done is wrap yourself in a narrative that stops you from being everything else.
I love that. Yeah, that's, sometimes when I hear you speak, and I have these conversations now and again with some of my friends, and sometimes I hear you say some things, I'm like, yeah, those are the words I actually wanted to say, but yeah, so that seems very powerful. Yeah.
Like I said, I'm old, man. I've been talking a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's
yeah.
been a practice. I remember I just never shut up about this. Once I woke up, that was it. I was just like, hey, you're going to change whether you like it or not. If you don't want to, I'm going to. And so I started passing out flyers at one point when I first woke up, trying to remind people, like, you're already a success and that you're the product of 1.5 billion years of existence. There's nothing to do, just be you. And then over years of trying to have these conversations and admittedly fumbling about through my own Christian mythology and all my other conceptual crap, because I was trying to weed all that out. Like, if you look back at my old videos from 2005, they're not very clear. They're all over the place. And it's because I was trying to distill all of this conceptual stuff down to the truth that I knew it was pointing towards. But that process really made me upset a lot of people over the years, a lot. And so that's more or less why when I'm speaking, it often sounds like, oh, that's a great way of putting it. And it's like, yeah, 50 pissed off people later, that's a great way of putting it.
Yeah. Let me see. I think I had other questions for you. I'm trying to see if I have them.
Yeah, no worries. We got about 20 minutes left here, so we'll just keep chatting.
So, on your, who so far has, have you, should I say, who reminds you, or who have you learned so much from in your last couple of years?
Okay, so I would have to say everybody I've met in the last couple of years, because I stopped reading a lot of books and I stopped listening to a lot of speakers probably about 5 or 10 years ago. And it was because it can be valuable to read through things. It can be valuable to dig through things like Alan Watts and Krishnamurti. You can go through Eckhart Tolle. You can go through all of these different books, and they're very, very useful. But they have to be applied at some point. And so I found I had to eventually put the book down in order to start listening to my actual reality, to start listening to the situations I was in. Because, for example, I'm learning more from you right now through my interaction with you than I've ever learned from reading a book from Alan Watts. And it's not because Alan isn't insightful as hell. It's because this is a living communication. This is actually me in the dance, as it were. And so it's not just conceptual. Now it's also about how I feel. It's about how I interact. It's about the responsibility that I'm in at the time that we're talking. And so I find my life to be the most fulfilling education I've ever found. But it really had to be in just allowing myself to look at what's in front of me without trying to get anything out of
it. Oh, I like that.
Takes practice.
So so I like to say this. I was at a stage in my life where first of all, I grew up Christian. I got to a point where I would have identified at that time as atheist. And then I think sometime when I was in college, I I started going to church. I had a few experiences that made me realize this thing called Christianity is really what I've been called to be, or called to whatever, however I phrase that. And that seemed very real to me at that time. And now that I'm where I am, I begin to realize, I go back to the past and I'm able to realize what all of that was, and how it's more about the stories. And I understand the power of stories and the stories that we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
And I'm here where a lot of what I know to be true are things that, yes, I was nodded in a direction, but I've been able to understand that the only real thing is the only real thing, which is the only real thing. I don't know how to explain that.
That's exactly.
Yeah, but then I asked myself again that, like, well, that itself is a narration. So I feel like I bounce in between.
Yep.
What is this?
Well, it's the same with my TikToks, right? Sometimes somebody clever will write to me and go, right, but aren't you not being by making these videos? It's like, that's true. Yep, absolutely. But nobody's going to watch me just sitting on a screen in silence. So I'm going to talk because there's no problem with talking, so long as you don't need to talk, as long as you're not trying to get anything out of the talking. I mean, there's no difference between what I do on TikTok and what I do in the rest of my life, in that it's just because I can, right? I'm not trying to get anything out of it. Like, I make my TikToks explicitly reminding myself I'm not trying to save anyone, and I'm not trying to change the world.
Yeah, so which goes to one of the questions I've been wishing to ask you is, I get, like, once again, at these times when I get so where I'm at that heightened state of awareness, where I do not see myself anymore. I see everything as me. I'm always, there's this eagerness to try to, connect with people around me, to tell them all and oftentimes I'm like, yeah, they probably think I'm crazy. And at some point I'm like, is it better to keep quiet and just observe? Or, like, what do you do with all of that? And I'm curious from your own perspective, like, do you ever think, like, yeah, all of this is beautiful, but I'm just going to, like, sit down and just enjoy this?
Yep.
Like,
all the time. All the time, for sure. And that's actually most of the time what I'm doing in my life, because I talk about this stuff on TikTok, and I talk to people who come into my life, but I don't talk to them immediately about awareness and unity. I used to pound people over the head with this pretty hard whenever they came into a conversation. It's like, hey, guess what you're going to talk about today? But what I found is that just talking to people as they come into my life about what they're going through, and just allowing myself to experience their perspective, I find little ways to nudge them closer to themselves. I find little ways to remind them, like, oh, you don't actually have to worry about that. That's just a thought. Let's not take that too seriously. So I'm nudging them towards a place where they can have their own insight instead of trying to give them that insight. So I find that's helpful. And it makes it a lot easier for me to continue to ride out that state of just contented bliss, because then I'm just enjoying myself. So it's always very tempting to have those states of awareness where you can see everything so clearly and then go, well, what can I do with this? But the state of mind itself is already changing you, which means that everything you do from there is different. So it's already done. Just continue on. There's no right answer. That's the real kick in the teeth about all this. It's like, you can do whatever you want. You want to go talk to people? You can talk to people. You want to stay by yourself and do nothing? You can do that too. There's nothing wrong with any of it.
Sure. I showed a friend of mine there was this video called the egg, and I was telling them how I could relate to that entire thing, and there's a lot of truth in that. And it was we had a very interesting discussion, and then she was like, so then what do I need to do? I'm like, really, you don't need to do anything. You just have to be. And in being, then you can do things. And saying that was really funny to me. Like even me, I sounded crazy, but I knew exactly what I was saying.
It's like, we're talking about the most epic, cerebral, and conscious journey any human can do. Just sit back and let it happen. Right? Don't I have to do something? It's like, actually, all you really have to do is look at why you're doing things, and everything else starts to come together. It's so counterintuitive to our very controlling, identifying brain, right? Our brain wants to feel like, no, there's a trophy I have to achieve. It's like, you're the trophy.
Yeah, these are really powerful.
Right? Well, and that's it, right? It's not even believe in yourself, just be yourself. Be who you are in moment to moment. If you're having an insight, be that. If you're feeling lost in your ego, be that. But it always comes back down to just pay attention. Just pay attention. Just watch and don't judge. And the less you judge, the more you're able to see of what you're doing. But we always try, and again, I blame religion for this to a large degree. We always hold ourselves up to purity tests. Christianity was the worst for this. And it's like, are you a sinner? What does that even mean? What does that mean? Because if you look up the etymology of sin, it means to miss the mark. That's all it means, is missing the point. It's like, that's not a hell-worthy trespass, except that in missing the point, you exist in hell. Right? Like that's it. It's not like you're going to be punished for it, but we have these purity tests. Like, oh, if you're thinking lustful thoughts, you're not God anymore. It's like, where do you think those thoughts come from? So it's the weirdest thing, but it always comes down to us trying to state this side is good, this side is bad, and that's always based on our own preferences.
Yeah. Yeah.
Somebody asked me recently, do you think there's any evil in the world? And I said, evil is a perspective of the parts of the whole we don't understand.
I've never thought of it that way.
It's very hard to understand the side that's destructive when you are trying not to be, right? But if you can accept that you have the capacity to be, it's easier to understand them.
Yeah, that's something I have. Wait, did you say this is going to be on YouTube? I need to think about that. I never thought about it that way.
Well, it's the reason, like, I can tell within a few minutes if somebody's trying to manipulate me, because I can accept that I am manipulating myself. I can accept that I have the capacity to lie. I can accept that I have the capacity to be selfish. And so in accepting that's within me, I can see it pretty quick. Right? But if I try to blind myself to that within myself, I get blindsided by it every time. If you can't see that you can lie, you can't see other people lying.
I think that's one of those things that I've of recent been trying to struggling to understand. Well, not struggling to understand. I understand it for the most part, but like you have those people who, for instance, who feel that they're super moral and would really condemn with pure disgust those who are what I would say are immoral. And I understand in myself, I understand how, if you're that way, if there's that part of you that you actually do not have not reconciled with, but then I can understand that for myself, but I wonder, like, do these people see it that way also, or is that just something that I understand for myself?
For the most part, we see that's the thing, right? Is the more you understand about yourself, the less likely you are to judge other people.
Oh yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I think that, like, okay, so in the US now you have the vaxxers and the anti-vaxxers, and you have these people who are like, yeah, I'm Democrat, and the Republicans are like these douchebags and all of that. And oftentimes I'm quick to realize, wait, first of all, we're kind of the same. And I don't even want to go way into that whole idea, but it's like I'm able to realize why somebody would say they're either a vaxxer or anti-vaxxer. And there is, if you understand why, if you see the other side, you are able to empathize, and somehow just being able to empathize that way will get you to be in the same boat with that. We still, however your ideology is, you can actually be together with whichever direction you are, and you don't see them as opposing. You see us as one, but we just decide to choose whichever direction that we want.
Well, and then we identify with the choice, right? It's not just enough that we made the choice, but my choice makes me valuable. Therefore, if you choose something different, you're not as valuable. And that's the only problem. I mean, it's like when we were growing up, the expression was live and let live. Whatever happened to that? Right?
Yeah.
Whatever. Where did that go? And it disappeared when we started realizing that, or rather, it disappeared the more we overcommitted to our choices being defining of our value. Because then it's like, if I believe this and that's what makes me valuable, then anybody who disagrees lowers my value. And now I have to attack them or defend myself against them or compare myself to them or vilify them. And I need to do that strictly because it's tearing apart the false security that I've been holding on to. Right? And that's it. It's not even a logical argument. It's a knee-jerk reaction to a feeling that you are suddenly losing your footing. Right? And it's only because you were basing it on something that wasn't, you were building a house on sand.
Yeah.
Right? Jesus, he had so many good stories, man. He really did. Like, that whole thing is like, watch where you build your house. You know, just be careful because it's going to fall apart. And it's true, right? And the same is true for our state of awareness and our state of mind. Is if we try to build our value, our sense of certainty on an idea, that idea will eventually crumble. It will eventually fall. And this is why I made a video the other day saying the truth has nothing to fear. Right? If somebody disagreeing with you lowers your vibration, then you're holding on to something. That's what's lowering your vibration. It's not them.
You know, now that you say, I watched that video, but now that you say it like this, I'm like, oh yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah.
But a couple people responded to that video and they're like, oh, awareness is harsh. It's like,
it just is.
It just is. It just is.
Yeah.
It doesn't care how you feel about it. That's the whole point. It's something I say to my daughter constantly. It's like, I understand you feel a certain way, but reality doesn't care. It doesn't care. Reality is what it is. Your interpretation of it's on you.
So how are you able to communicate some of these things to your daughter?
It's getting easier now because she's 14, so she's starting to experience more of the consequence that goes with self-definition, with thinking about yourself and assuming things about others, because now she's at an age where that's just part of what her brain is doing. And so she'll go through that for a bit, and then she'll start to feel doubt about herself, and then she'll express like, I'm really feeling this way. And it's like, okay, well, let's talk about that. Like, what's different about how you've been thinking recently? And because I've been talking to her about this for her whole life, I find it amazing that sometimes she will come to me. Well, here's a perfect example. Last summer, when we moved into this place, she decided, well, I'm going to redo my room since we're in a new house. And so she started looking online and on TikTok for other people's ideas for how to do her room. And she decorated her room according to their ideas. And about a week later, she came to me and she said, I don't feel like it's my room. I feel like I'm living what other people think my room should be. I was blown away because I wouldn't have had that insight at 14 years old. I know I wouldn't have. And so she took apart her room, decided what fit her, and redecorated the whole thing. And it was because she could feel that sensitivity of, this doesn't feel right. I don't feel like I'm myself. And it's like, that's amazing, because I would have gone through so much cognitive dissonance trying to figure that out. It's just, but this is it, is that there are times when I look at my daughter and I honestly, there's a part of me that's almost a little envious by the fact that she won't have to go through the same confusion and identity and loss that we got indoctrinated with, because nobody around us knew any better.
Yeah.
Soon she's going to be teaching me. Right? If not already. Life is never what it seems to be. I always joke that life is half-assed backwards, right? We get so committed to things that take us farther from where we want to go. And Krishnamurti used to laugh about that knowledge is not conceptual. And so all of our vast libraries, all of our huge books and our tomes of knowledge trying to get us closer and closer to the truth, get us farther and farther away. And that's such a pain, because the more we dig into concepts, the less we are being ourselves.
Yeah, and examining a lot of what life is, which is a paradox, just makes you realize that like holding on to anything is actually not holding on to anything. So it's like life is such a paradox that you just have to enjoy playing around with these concepts, with these not concept, with whatever this is, because I think that's what the fun is. And everything is fun. Everything is so much fun.
As long as we're not in the way.
Yeah, and I go through these moments where, okay, you're happy because you got an Amazon package, or somebody said something nice to you, or you're sad because you got an email, or something happens to you, and then you have all these fluctuations. I'm able to catch myself realizing, oh yeah, you're going through all of this, but that's all right, and that's beautiful.
Absolutely, that's it, right? It's just let go, and it's letting go of the opinion of what we're doing, right? And that's hard when we look back at our past and we judge it and we try to make it self-defining. It always comes back down to thinking about ourselves, and it's frustrating to people because sometimes they'll say like, well, how do I get out of this? I'm like, stop thinking about yourself. That's all you have to do. And they're like, that doesn't sound very helpful. It's like, it will be if you try.
Yeah, one of the tools that I recommend to people is meditation. I know that's overbitten, but I think meditation has helped me to actually realize that I'm not my mind or my body. And that's very difficult. I think it takes a while for you to actually sit down and ask yourself, who is thinking?
Right.
Who is thinking? What is thinking? What exactly is this? Like, just watch it. Yep. And then that watching is actually what is our awareness.
And it's transformative, right? Because every time we do that, our brain rewires to make it easier to do that, right? Like,
oh yeah, that's
I will admit, I almost never meditate anymore. I think I've meditated maybe 10 minutes in the last month. And it's because most of the time I'm in a state of meditation. It doesn't matter if I'm working or walking or talking to people. Meditation is just paying attention without attachment, without judgment, right? Just watching the thoughts go by. And so I often find it interesting that I was saying this to another person I was talking to last week, that it's like I put a quarter in and I just see what comes out. Like I don't think about what I'm going to say in a conversation for the most part. I find myself speaking, and then after the fact going, oh, that was pretty good. Like it's just, it's not cognitive, it's not effort. It's more or less just, I'm just going to allow myself to be whatever it is I'm being right now. And this is what Jesus was saying when he said, my words are my Father's, right? Our words are exactly what they're supposed to be, whether we realize where they're coming from or not. We are playing our part. And our problem is that we get too attached to it, and then we judge ourselves and we distort the words even more.
Yeah. And that place of awareness is actually the most beautiful place to be. Like, it's just so, like, I don't want to use the word soothing, because that's also, it has an undertone of physicality to it, but it's just, it feels like that's where you are supposed to be.
Yeah, it's freedom. It's who you actually are, right? And it's so. And I wanted to talk about this before we wrap up here because we're running out of time. But you were saying you want to talk about unity, and I wanted to touch on this quickly because it's one thing to talk about unity in terms of us being physical beings connected all the time, because we are, despite the fact that you're on the other side of the continent, we are totally connected through however many ripples of energy and however many different formats of solid or liquid are between us. It's all one energy thing. But more importantly, when we are in that state of awareness, when we're not thinking about ourselves, when we are just being, there is no division. There's no conceptual division between you and me. You're not even thinking of me as a separate person. That's the realization of unity. That's the state of being that is whole. It's because there's no conceptual division. It's just the embodiment of wholeness, because we are always one. It's when we conceptually divide ourselves that things get all weird, when we go, oh, there's you and me. right?
Yeah, but I think most people will struggle with even that because we are we are somehow too conceptual. So while we're talking about unity, you're still seeing that there's a division somewhere. You
Well,
know,
that's it.
so I find it very difficult to. I understand what you're saying, and somehow I feel like are there like better words to describe what you're trying to say? Because
Yes.
it, that the idea of us being one in unity is actually not about it's not about it's not about us being the same person. It's about us being I struggle to find these words. It's about us being the same but not the same. I don't know how to put it.
I get it. It's paradoxical, right? So if I was to remove your entire story, if I was to remove your history up until this point right now, including your name, all your memories, everything else, and I was to do the same for myself, and we were both asked the same question, who are you? We would both give the answer, me,
Mm-hmm.
because
Oh
we're
yeah, I love
both the
that.
same awareness, right? If you and I were in a dream, if you and I were two characters in a dream of the same mind, we would both have different experiences in that dream, but we would be the product of the same mind,
Oh, I like that.
right? And that's what we are. That's what I mean by we're not separate. You and I have the ability to conceptually separate. We can see ourselves as separate and experience ourselves as separate, but we are ultimately the same mind interacting with itself. And so for me to have the experience of, say, being manipulated by somebody in that dream, or somebody as an extension of my awareness, has to manipulate me for that experience to happen. So I am both the manipulated and the manipulator. It's just that I can
Yeah.
only be aware of one side at a time from this perspective or from this character. It's kind of like saying my tongue can't hear, right?
Mhm.
And it's because my tongue serves a different purpose. It's still part of me, the whole, but it can't understand what my ear is experiencing because they're two different things, but they're both me.
Oh, yeah. So I use this example. I've used this example with a friend before. I said, like, if you think about an octopus, you think about the tentacles, like whether it's 8 tentacles or I don't know how many tentacles an octopus has. But now, if one of the tentacles is grabbing a soda and another is grabbing an umbrella, who is grabbing it?
That's right.
You say the octopus. Okay, so if you chop off the tentacles or one of the tentacles, is the tentacle the octopus or where's the octopus?
That's right.
Then you say, okay, so it's the octopus's tentacle, but it's no like, is that still the octopus?
Is it still the octopus? Exactly.
You know, so if you chop off each of the tentacles, you still have the octopus. So the octopus itself is not the tentacle. It's not the eye, it's not the belly. So what is the octopus?
Yeah. And this is what I was talking to Andrew Murnane about this last month or last week about
Yeah.
if I'm influencing you and you're influencing me and we're influencing everybody around us and they're influencing us all the time from day one, where's the dividing line?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Right? And that's the thing, is that conceptually there is one. I can say I'm separate from you. I can experience that illusion. I can commit to that illusion and make it my whole world. And I can make you suffer as a result of me overcommitting to that illusion if you decide to believe me. Right? But that doesn't make it real just because I'm making it real.
Oh yeah, true. I tell myself that I'm a story alchemist, and that's because I'm able to create any story, you know, and we all are able to create whichever story, and we live in those stories that we tell ourselves, you know.
Yep.
But is the story the truth, or is it an illusion?
That's it, right? Is it
Yeah.
helping? Is it helping? Is this adding to your life or taking from it? And for me, my particular, I guess, chosen path, if you'd like to say it, is not to have one. I honestly want to see what happens if I don't have a story.
Hmm. Huh.
I am very curious to see what alignment does.
But you know, talking about paradoxes, that itself is a story.
right?
Yeah.
Might as well make it fun, right?
Yeah. Oh gosh.
This has been just an incredibly fun conversation. I hope we can do this again, maybe in a couple of weeks if you're up for it.
Yeah, sure. I enjoy this. I don't have the opportunity to talk about this but yeah, so this is so much fun.
I'm really glad. I've had a great time. We're just going to wrap up. Is there anything you'd like to say before we do?
I think I like to. One of the things I tell everybody is just enjoy all of this. Just enjoy all of this. And enjoyment it's just interesting that anybody who's caught up with the is too identified with the physical would think that when I say enjoyment, I'm talking about, I'm talking so much about the physicalities. It's just there's a pleasure that's you can't really articulate from a physical perspective, but everything is meant to be enjoyed. That's how I think.
Is it clarity?
Yeah.
Clarity.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I have nothing of value to add to that. That was perfect. So I will end this here, and I will send you an email in about a week, and then we'll touch base again.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you,
so
man. This
much.
has been so
Yeah.
much fun. I really look
Same
forward to
here.
doing this again.